Welcome to Ashbrook Live. Great to have you here. I'm talking today with Dr. Margaret Bourdeaux. Have you been following COVID? Are you sick of it? Are you overwhelmed by everything we've had to do to deal with it? I guess all of us are at this point. We've been hoping that the vaccine would lead us out in a matter of weeks or months out of this endless lockdown, uncertainty, fear of death, fear of losing taste and smell and family members and life. We've all hoped for that. I heard Dr. Margaret Bourdeaux say last week that Team COVID is winning in spite of the fact that we've got vaccines out there now, multiple vaccines out there now, big efforts going in to get them out around the country, though far from what we need. In spite of all that, Margaret Bourdeaux saying Team COVID is winning. She's out of Harvard and Harvard Medical School. She studies health systems in conflict-afflicted states like ours lately. And here we are with COVID in the middle of all that. I want to bring her right in. It's great to have her with us. She's research director at the Security and Global Health Project at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. And we're going to ask her to join us right now. Margaret, are you there? Yes, Margaret Bourdeaux.
Hi.
Hi. Wonderful to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. This time of day is always a little bit of a juggling act.
Kidding. There you are. Hi.
Hey there. I was just saying this time of day is always a little bit of a juggling act. I think I've shooed everyone out. And
I know exactly. Everything off screen can be mayhem, but here we are.
I have my protective screen behind me. Exactly. Yes. Don't look behind the curtain.
Right. A little new age Japanese shoji and we're all good to go. What a time we live in. I want to look at everything about COVID and I'm so fascinated in your perspective on this. But what about this video that's come out in the last 24 hours from AOC in her office, describing how she was in her office and in Katie Porter's office in the Capitol on January 6th, fearing for her life, hiding behind a bathroom door, racing through empty corridors, people shouting and banging and coming through her office and fearing that she was within seconds of death. Did you watch that? I was just blown away.
Yeah, so actually I was in the Capitol building as well. And
on January 6th.
Yes, my sister has just been elected to Congress. She's Carolyn Bourdeaux. She's a new member of Congress from Georgia's 7th Congressional District.
Wow, congratulations to her.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. So I had gone to DC. They were allowed, one person to come and watch them be sworn in.
Yeah.
So I decided to stick around, though, because it was pretty clear, bad things were going to happen. So I ended up sticking around on that Wednesday, to the day they were certifying the vote. And so I was not too far from AOC, but I went in to give my sister some lunch and her staff some lunch.
Yeah.
She was preparing to defend the vote in Georgia because that was going to be contested.
Under attack, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so I stepped into her office. I got the call. You need to stop answering the phones and lock your doors. And at first I was like, oh, well, okay, I can hear the protests outside. They were coming right by the street. I was like, oh, these aren't the Medicare for All folks, are they?
Right.
So, they had been actually out there every day prior to that.
Yeah.
And so, we locked the door. But then we got the call of turn off your phones, turn off your lights, pull your shades, do not answer the phones, get behind as many locked doors and barricades as you can. It was just incredibly harrowing. And we were on text chains, with the other congressional members, many women of color who had been elected, describing similar situations as AOC, wondering if we were going to make it out again to see our children. It was very, very intense. And I would say for about 30, 40 minutes, I thought, we're not, the thought occurred to me, right, that we were going to be dragged out and executed in the hallway.
Did you hear the crowds rampaging in the hallways outside your sister's office?
Very fortunately, my sister's office is on the 3rd floor. Nancy Pelosi's office is on the 1st floor in that office building. And I think, there were 2 moments. So fortunately, we did not have people on our, knocking on our door.
Thank God.
I think it was, thank God. I mean, we could hear people running in the hallways. But anyone that's ever been in a lockdown like that knows that you don't really know what's happening. I would say that
That's right.
sort of two moments that were really upsetting. Well, three. One was we turned on CNN silently. We're
Yes.
watching it, and we saw the huge crowd on the steps, which is really around the corner from the office building. And there, these office buildings are connected by hallways, right?
Of course.
And so I looked up. There was thousands of people. I've worked, as we'll talk about, in many conflict-affected countries. I'm very familiar with crowds like this and what they can do. And all of a sudden, I looked up, and there was no crowds. And at first, I thought, oh, maybe
great, they're gone.
Exactly. They're like, no, they're in the building. And I was like, okay, thousands of people coursing through these hallways. This is very, very bad. And so at that moment, we thought, we had a discussion. We were like, should we just try to leave? Should we just try to
get out of here?
Just get out of here. I mean, because I did not want the confrontation of them coming through the door and finding us. I was like, that's so, we thought about it, and I was like, let's take off, anything that would look like, and right around that time, the second sort of horrible thing was, well, two things. One was that they said that the request for the National Guard had been denied.
Yeah.
And that's when we were like, okay, we are not just dealing with, potentially not just dealing with an angry crowd. We're dealing with something that is much more coordinated. That was very upsetting. And then right around that same time, member of Congress, a woman of color, was texting my sister saying, what should I do? Where should I hide? And it just occurred to us, of course, right, that she is not thinking about melding into this crowd and leaving her office.
Right.
And, we were like, okay, the chips are down. I think the more horrifying thing, though, frankly, was sort of after, where we sort of realized that the problem that we're facing in this country is so profound, and that we really do have a sizable number of people here who are in office, who are willing to set the democracy on fire as long as that they can maintain power. And we are still playing, jumping to their tune. We are still very concerned about, what they think and their desires, their interests, what can we do to appease them? And I think, in that moment, we all were like, this is over. We're not playing this game anymore. We just can't. They have to come to us and apologize before we're going to work with them. And that's really a hard thing. And I think it's something my sister really struggles with, because she's a very, moderately tempered, I mean, not necessarily her ideas, but, she's a real bipartisan, let's work together kind of person, and has been for her whole political career. And it really is it's just a reckoning. It's just a very profound moment. So I'm really glad that AOC put that out there, her story. I'm really glad that Katie Porter is taking a stand. And, I think women and Black women and brown women, and I will say white women, we don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to live in this country. And, the expectation that we're going to back down and we're going to say, okay, well, let's just give you what you want anyway, gets me a little hot around the collar. So,
well, I understand that entirely. When you say you don't want to live in this country, you mean this country in this way. You don't want to live in
this way. No, we are not going to take this. We are not going to back down. They are going to back down. And I'm sorry that right now, they don't seem to be as scared of us as they are of their base. But our job is to make them scared of us by, really contesting their power at every corner and really checking it.
Does your sister feel safe in the Capitol today, Margaret? Do Congress people around her feel safe? We've heard many say that they do not. From fellow Congress members, potentially.
Yeah. Yes, I think I'm very worried about her safety. Maybe, she's there, and, like I said, I've worked in many places around the globe where there's very high levels of political violence, and
that's your work.
That often people outside your family members worry about you more than you feel in the moment. But anyway, she does seem to be okay. There was about a week afterward where in the run up to the inauguration, really where they got some very concerning security briefings about potential attacks on Democratic congressional members on their way to work. And so Carolyn decided to go be in an undisclosed location so that I and her family didn't know where she was. But I'll tell you the bigger thing that has worried her is her family, back in Georgia. And, how do they, make sure that they are as safe as possible? And that's a very new dynamic.
it makes my blood boil to think that Americans come out and elect representatives from their community to represent them in our government, and then they have to fear for their lives, their physical safety as a result. This is, I know you've worked in that kind of zone around the world, so have I, but
Yeah.
I never imagined that being in
Yeah.
our country. Never imagined that being our affliction. And here it
I,
is.
yeah, I agree. And I know you have as well. And yeah, the only thing I really draw on, Tom, is I am a white Southerner, a sort of liberal Southerner from a
Mm.
long line of white liberal Southerners.
So you have some
And
historical sense.
there is a little bit of my great aunt was a state representative in Mississippi in the 1960s, and really faced a lot of threats on her life. My aunt was the county commissioner in Greensboro, North Carolina, at a time when she really went after tobacco companies and the agreements they'd signed with the state, and really, that was also a very scary moment. So I think that there are some touchstones around, and of course, AOC is reminding us, as are many of the Black political leadership, that this has been their America, for a long time, and I think that
Fair enough.
yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to connect, but I think certain things really hardened in my heart on January 6th.
Well, there's some places we cannot go as a nation.
Nope,
And
we're not going to go there.
blood on the floor of the Capitol building is got to be among them.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Well, I wish safety to your sister and to everyone on Capitol Hill, and good on you for being there on that day. Listen, let's jump into COVID, because everybody's weary of this. Everyone wants out of this, and yet anyone who's thinking about it sees the magnitude of it. We had simultaneously, I think, at the end of last year, been really heartened by the emergence of these vaccines, and then subsequently really horrified again at how COVID has surged in this country. And now we're reading every day about new variants emerging with different characteristics from different parts of the world, with different impact on how well they can be treated, on how contagious or infectious they are, and how they affect the survivability of COVID, and how they respond to the vaccines potentially. I heard you say last week, Team COVID is winning, despite everything that we've poured into this. And I shouldn't say that it was a whole lot of effective pouring in this country last year. It was dysfunction, it was denial, it was disillusioning if you're looking on from the outside. But here we are, it's February now of 2021. I think if you had told people almost a year ago that a year out, someone who with your kind of experience would say that the COVID was still winning, that sounded like an astonishing idea. Surely we would get on top of this, and we haven't. And you're suggesting we aren't. Why not? What do you mean when you say Team COVID is winning?
Right. Right. So one of the things that metaphors I've kind of come to is this idea of a race between, Team COVID and Team Human. I really should refine it a little bit and say it's a chase. It's Team Human is chasing Team COVID, and there's something about all of this that feels analogous to trying to hunt down a ruthless killer. And every time we sort of see our way forward in our strategy, we're about to capture the criminal, all of a sudden, they elude us. And I think we're at that moment again. So, in the beginning, it was like, can we, keep this, from escaping Wuhan, China? And okay, can we keep this from, coming into this country? Oh no, okay. Can we roll out a really robust public health strategy that includes, contact tracing and testing and environmental modifications? Well, yeah, I guess we could, but let's just not, and let's just wait, because we have the silver bullet coming, these vaccines, and we're just going to hunker down, just wait for the vaccine, and then all the countries that can afford it are going to vaccinate their people, and then we'll get around to thinking about, oh well, other folks that can't pay for the vaccine, as we'll get to it then, and we'll vaccinate folks, and then this will slowly kind of fade away.
As if it would all stand still and wait for us to do all that. Oh, vanished dream.
Exactly. So COVID, it turns out, has other plans. And right now it has done something really extraordinary. And I think the implications of
Mm,
this
mm,
are so profound that it's hard for me to even see them in full. So this idea that COVID, when you allow it to spread and reproduce willy-nilly in populations of billions of people, that
mhm.
it is going to learn new tricks, and it's going to learn to evade our vaccine. The vaccine that we thought that we put so much money in, that we really sort of approached with a me first, us first kind of mentality. Uh,
America first.
America
Mm,
first, right?
mhm,
And really underfunding some of the global efforts to really work together to address this epidemic. That was all going to be okay. Well, now what happens if COVID, if we allow it to reproduce in other places, and then that undermines and makes worthless or less efficacious our vaccine? Uh-oh, now equity matters in a very, very different way.
global equity.
And a global equity, and equity in this country too. I mean,
Mhm.
it's all of a sudden it really has shifted from this kind of nice to have, oh, be a good person and invest in equity because that's just the right thing to do,
Mhm.
to wait a minute, our fates truly are tied, not in some spiritual way necessarily, but in a very practical, profound way, that we're not going to be able to move forward here unless we proceed in a way that everybody is going to have some access relatively rapidly, both to the vaccine and then also to a robust non-vaccine public health strategy that is not grounded in social distancing is basically the one measure.
Mhm.
So I think it's dawning on folks that we're in a very, very different type of chase. We're in a very different type of game now.
Meaning, as long as it's running wild anywhere, the chance for these dramatic mutations is spikes much higher, and those mutations may be more infectious, more deadly, more resistant to the vaccines that we have. And we know how the world works now. Despite every effort, they'll eventually probably be everywhere. They'll be here.
Exactly. Exactly. So it matters, what happens in South Africa, what happens in Nigeria, what happens in Indonesia, what happens in, Uzbekistan. That all of a sudden really matters whether we are going to be able to contain this. And I think that we had sort of thought about that, a little bit before, but not quite in this way, not quite in this tangible way. So yeah, so I would say that that's going to really reshape um, how we conceive of our relationship between one another,
Mhm.
and our role in global diplomacy, and how countries relate to one another, and how we tackle projects where either everybody wins or everybody loses, which is a little different than sort of the Cold War, right? Where the Cold War was a little bit more of a zero
Yeah.
sum game kind of mentality. And this is a really different kind of game, a new world, I think we're entering into. One of
We
the
in that way, I mean, people follow these numbers, right? And January has been a terrible, terrible month in terms of new cases, in terms of deaths, 95,000 deaths, I think.
Mhm.
But we've looked at the new case fever line, and it spiked way up toward the end of the year and into January, and it has fallen dramatically since middle of the month. So people look at that, and I've seen many headlines saying, "Hey, maybe we're over the hump. Maybe we're moving into the clear." When you look at that chart, what do you see, Mark? Doctor?
Well, uh, I see a country that has still not invested in its non-vaccine public health strategy. We still are really relying on shutdowns, on social distancing as our major way of driving down our epidemic curves. And that way of doing it is extracts a very high price on all of us. an economic price, a social price. I mean, don't you want to go to the ball game? I want to go to the ball game.
Yes.
You know,
So what's the thing that we're not doing? I
right.
mean, we need a
So
lot more vaccine out there in a hurry.
yeah,
And we know we
right.
need to wear masks. We know we need to ideally keep some distance, stay out of small enclosed places or smaller enclosed places. But is it something else that would let us go to ball games and still beat this?
Yeah, so I like to talk about the three-legged stool in terms of infectious disease control strategy, and this is sort of a you know something that applies to all sort of epidemics. You kind of ask three questions. You first say, okay, what can we do about the environment that this virus is being transmitted in? How can we modify it so that it is the environment is less transmissible? And every disease and every pathogen has its own answer to this. With Ebola, we found out that transmission was occurring in environments where people were caring for their very sick loved ones or burying them. And so we realized that we had to change the way that those environments were structured. In the hospital, we had to have very different control measures for Ebola. Same with SARS-1. SARS-1 was very lethal, but it really was infectious at the end of somebody's disease course. So they were mostly in the hospital. So we realized that infections in the hospital were the way that we had to modify the environment of hospitals. With COVID, we realized that ventilation, air filtration, and even humidification of the air can make a tremendous difference in whether the virus is transmitted indoors. So that's kind of your environmental strategies. Then you have your population.
That sounds simple, but if you start to think about moving new ventilation into all the public spaces where we gather or have gathered or used to gather, it sounds daunting.
Intimidating. Well, it is, but it's not in some sense. I was in Congress watching my sister get sworn in, and all of a sudden, all the members ran into the room, and it was hundreds of people all of a sudden. They were trying to stage it out so that so that people would be distant. But I was sort of reassured because I'd gotten this lecture on how pure the air in Congress is. They were so worried about aerosolized anthrax that they put in all this fabulous ventilation. So you can kind of really do a big job on it, but sometimes it's just really opening the windows and having an air filter it's really not that hard to think about. And I think that we might not be, every single building might not be up to perfect code, but it's pretty low tech, really. A humidifier, I mean, these are not UV lights in your ventilation system that we're talking about. This is these are pretty standard things. So I do think that's doable. The other leg of the stool, or the other question you ask yourself is, okay, what are those behaviors that people are engaging in that is causing transmission? Here we see that masks are much more effective than we had realized, and we can up our mask game. Let's get better masks to folks that are more effective. Of course, social distancing is the other sort of thing in that bucket or on that leg of the stool. But I think that's pretty hard to maintain for so long. And then the third leg of the stool is contact tracing. Now, contact tracing has 4 steps. One is case identification. That's really through testing. And then you try to find the folks that have been infected and find the folks that they may have exposed to the disease. It's a very tailored approach. And then try to keep them separate from others for a period of time to make sure they don't pass it on. Now, I want to talk, so those are the kind of 3 legs of the stool, but really the most important part of the stool is the top. And the top is what I like to call public health intelligence. And this is data that tells you whether where the infection is spreading, who has it, and whether what you're doing is working and how you can refine it, how you can refine all 3 legs of the stool. And so to make it less and less and less onerous and more effective. And that process, that iterative process where we're learning about, is it safe to open schools? Is it safe to, let's say I have a 5-day quarantine with testing every day rather than a 2-week quarantine? Is it safe to, what is the humidity at which your building should be kept with your, $20 humidifier? That kind of learning is really where I think we've fallen down. as a country. Okay.
Well, I mean, when I listen to it sounds so nice the way you lay it out, and I'm all for it. But when I look at our actual behavior over this last near year now, it looks to me like we've got bad grades on almost every front. I mean, information, it wasn't even allowed to be collected, let alone disseminated in a strategic way. Even Dr. Fauci couldn't step to the microphone. Environments, are you kidding me? I mean, maybe Congress has pure air, but I wouldn't trust classrooms around this country and the information about what's really needed and how to implement it and the money to do that. I haven't seen that. Masks, are you kidding me? We've had practically a civil war over masks in this country. And to my observation, it's only lately that it's really become ubiquitous in a lot of places. I mean, we've got a listener here. And by the way, listeners, viewers, we welcome your questions for Dr. Margaret Bourdeaux. She's all over COVID right now. COVID is winning, she says, or at least in the chase, it's ahead of us. And that's a kind of victory. James is watching and says, this virus is far more adaptable than we have been.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest suggests that things are going its way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. So yeah, I mean, just to respond to your response, which is a very normal and natural one, and has been how I've felt over the last year. It's probably the most, I mean, I would be lying to you if I didn't say there were times I was not driven to my knees physically over the despair over how we've responded. So that's true. I think the biggest headwinds have been coming from the federal government that just didn't want to believe it, and they didn't want to fight. They didn't want to chase. They didn't want to do it. And so they didn't. And all of us sat there putting out reports, doing studies. I should also just say my role is I'm the director of the program in global public policy at Harvard Medical School. And that program's sort of raison d'etre is to connect practitioners in global health that tackle some of these really difficult global health crises with policymaking and policy thinkers and policy forums, because you learn a lot by doing, right? And so if that is not connected to policy formulation, that learning, then usually you end up with
bad
policies, right? So, we could see things like we were helping Partners in Health that runs the contact tracing program in Massachusetts for the state. We could see that that testing was rolling out in a very maladaptive way. It wasn't getting to folks that were living in communities where there were hotspots. Testing was rolling out in hospitals that you had to have access to, in order to get diagnosed with COVID. So, and then we could see that the communities that had the meat packaging and the fish packaging plants had huge outbreaks, but they couldn't get testing. Testing turnaround times were 14 days.
And we all lived this. We all saw it.
We all lived it, right? So we could see it very, very early, and we just, leaned against the brick wall, pounding, please, change how you're rolling out testing, please put money. And, we just couldn't make a dent, really. And so the good news, right, is that we have a new administration that really does get it. They understand a lot about COVID and want to do something and understand how it's really holding it's devastating impacts. And that's, January 20th. So what are we? We're February 2nd. In some ways, I feel like now we've just started to chase COVID. Otherwise, we were sort of running in place. So I would agree that that COVID is adapting. It is a very formidable pathogen. But we can do this. Hey, are you kidding me? Ebola outbreaks in West Africa and the DRC, okay, those were some of the most wrenching, you just thought, God, how are those ever going to be brought to heel?
It looked impossible.
You just looked up the epidemic curve. It was just straight up, and you thought, this has no health system. There was no doctors. There's no, and you know what? You dig in and you figure it out. in the DRC and Eastern Congo, in the DRC and the eastern part, which was very conflict affected, they had a very prolonged, protracted Ebola outbreak, where people did not believe that Ebola existed. The leadership of the country had told people that they couldn't vote in a very contentious election because of the Ebola outbreak. So people thought it was just a complete hoax. And, can you imagine if you were told you can't
Sounds familiar.
vote, right? Yeah. So, people were furious. They were attacking health workers. There was a whole sort of criminal enterprise that was up and running, trying to, hurt people and health workers. You just looked at that and thought, oh my gosh, there's no way this can be brought to heel. But you know what? It was. And
Africa did it.
Yeah, and they did it because they got to work. They worked the problem, and lots of problems. They sent anthropologists to people's homes and sit there with them, and explain the disease, explain the vaccine. They had people, when they came into the hospital where people thought you just went to die. They had big parties for them when they released them from the hospital, and had showed folks that they would survive this. And so I know we can do, and if you look at the logistics, I mean, Nigeria and Ebola, those guys, they put together I think they had 36,000 cases that they followed every single day for a month in person, measuring people's temperature for 30 days. In Lagos to do contact tracing for Ebola. I mean, of course we can do this. Of course.
Okay. I mean, it would be crazy to say humans can't take on a challenge like this and meet it. But it would be crazy also to say on the evidence that we've done that in any legitimate degree, and that we're not facing still great challenges. I mean, the new conflict afflicted zone that we're all looking at right now is on our own doorstep. It's our own country. Yeah. We don't have even this big new COVID package that President Biden has put up passed yet, and there's a lot of money in there for tackling COVID. There's all kinds of consensus that we don't have yet, which is why the emergence of these new strains is so disturbing, because it seems to suggest that the challenge could get more difficult even as we try and muster our resources to seriously take it on. Yeah. Can we just look at that for a moment? We're hearing about new strains that have come out of, we've seen them in the UK, out of South Africa. I think I heard something out of Japan. I don't even know where they all come from. And this one, B117, that's really kind of taken over in the UK now and is 20 to 40% more infectious and maybe more deadly as well. We got Dr. Fauci saying today that these could mutate out of range of our current vaccines so that they would not be really effective. Right. I mean, what's the challenge that we're facing if we don't get our act together quickly and massively to smack this down?
Right. So, well, nothing good. I mean, there's nothing good, So what could happen, right, is that COVID could mutate out of our vaccine capability, and the vaccines would essentially not work anymore. Now, I do want to make sure to say that the variants that we have, know about so far have not met that criteria. The vaccine still is effective against the variants that we've identified.
Thank God.
And that's very important for people to understand. And the reason you should get vaccinated is so that we just take big bites out of that epidemic curve, so that the virus doesn't have a chance to mutate out of it. So,
I mean, to be clear again, because the more people who have it, is the more opportunity for the virus to mutate into. It's just a bigger petri dish to work in, right?
Exactly. So the idea that you are safe if you've gotten vaccinated, but the rest of the world has high transmission rates is a false safety, because it means that eventually COVID will figure it out and will mutate into something that is the vaccine doesn't recognize. Now, let me also just say another sort of word of hope here, because I do want to, So, what could happen is we may need to change our vaccine and do another round of vaccination. So, and we may need to do that regardless, even if we move at all haste and all speed. So that is an option to do that. And of course, we do that with the flu vaccine, right? The flu, seasonal flu, you get your flu shot at the beginning.
Yeah.
But by the end of the season, it's mutated so that the vaccine is a little less efficacious, and they have to reconfigure the vaccine. So sometimes they're like, oh, get your vaccine a little later in the season, but don't do that. Just get it both times if you need to.
But the difference to me, Margaret, seems to be that the flu has come to fall within our margin of tolerance for disease and morbidity, right?
Yeah.
The death rate is low enough that, right or wrong, we've come to say, okay, we can live with this, but COVID's a lot more lethal. And we don't want that. We don't want that running around all the time every year and morphing every year and out of control constantly. I mean, how do we live in a society like that where we have to constantly be so distanced and isolated? And so we need to get on top of this, but that seems like it. So the sort of rolling effort to keep up with it doesn't seem like such a great idea here to this layman anyway. It seems like you want to bring one big hammer down in a confined period of time so that you kind of squash it. Or is that still, that's what we imagined happening like 2 months ago? Is that now a vanished vision?
I think that it is something we can do, but the window for it is closing. So that means that if Congress can't get it together and pass this relief package, if we cannot institute a robust public health strategy alongside a robust vaccination strategy, then yes, the window for that scenario is going to close. Now, let me also just say the other thing we have to get right. Okay, so it's the robust public health strategy, it's the vaccine rollout for us, it's the delivery mechanism for the rest of the world. Okay.
I get it, which makes it even more
huge, right? It's like, so what we're seeing, it's like that Indiana Jones movie, where he's sliding underneath the door and the door is closing and he reaches in and gets the hat. Well, that's where we're at. We're reaching in to get the hat now. And so it's, if we want that scenario, we have to, we have to get our act together. Now,
there's still time for that within this country, let alone globally. And it's all one. I get it. It's all one. Yeah. Have we already lost that ability to sort of bring down the gate on this?
I don't think we've lost it yet, but I can't give you a time frame on which we will. I think that,
I mean, they're still trying to get assurances that Moderna and Pfizer will meet their contractual obligations or promise to deliver 100 million doses each by the end of March. It's as we speak today, it's not clear that they'll even fulfill that, and that volume is not nearly enough to get us on top of this just in the United States.
So that's right. So the thing that needs to occur is some pretty deep thinking about how we rev up global manufacturing of the vaccine and have some very tough conversations with Moderna and Pfizer and others about how they issue their vaccine licenses, whether they'd be willing to issue vaccine licenses to others to manufacture. AstraZeneca, has signed an agreement with India to do that with their vaccine, which is very encouraging. And there's a lot of folks thinking about it. But you're right. Can we bring this off? It's a heavy lift. Every day that goes by, it's a heavy lift. And you're right. We're exhausted. I feel like I've been saying that, on interviews for
way too long,
for a year. But there is more momentum now because of United States leadership sort of getting going again.
Is there an American-led? I mean, I know there's this program to get vaccine out to the world. But again, in our age of innocence, which was about 2 minutes ago, that seemed to suggest, well, we'd get some, little, it was almost like token distribution to the rest of the world, just to say that we weren't completely evil. Now, we need everybody vaccinated everywhere. That program doesn't seem sufficient. Who's spearheading, or is there even anyone spearheading a real global effort to vaccinate globally and stop this thing? Is that even out there?
Well, I think the COVAX facility and the ACT Accelerator and COVAX is going to become a household term in America in about 6 weeks,
Okay.
because that is a really clever, very well, I mean, as well thought through as I think it could be, effort, seated at the World Health Organization and Gavi basically to pool resources to purchase vaccines and to allocate them equitably. And so they have remained underfunded. So I think that the funding can improve for them. I think that there's a real opportunity to have the United States and COVAX lead efforts to have these technology transfers and expanded vaccine licenses to go to manufacturers and rev up. Right now, we have manufacturers that are going to be idle right now around the world.
Crazy. In other words, instead of Moderna and Pfizer and the other handful who have vaccines just working their own tails off to get this manufactured more quickly, let every pharmaceutical maker manufacture this, give them the recipe.
That's right. Now, it's not just a matter of, writing it on a piece of paper and handing it off.
Of course.
So, I kind of like to think about it like, okay, you have a kitchen, you have a chef, you have a recipe, and you have your servers. Is sort of sort of analogy. You can't just give the recipe to any old manufacturer that has manufactured, let's say, flu vaccine around the world, because these vaccines are different. And so you're going to also need to probably make some improvements in the kitchen and also some improvements with the training of the chef in order to do this. And, you do have to give a fair deal to these pharmaceutical companies that have leaned in to produce this. I mean,
yes, I assume they're going to make billions. I assume they'll make
well,
billions.
That's right.
How many billions? I mean, that's where we may be at an inflection point where you have to put up global health, the survival globally of millions of humans against the last 10 billion or extra 20 billion they might, I don't know.
Right. Well, this whole conversation is kind of like a freight train, coming to a tea party, in the sense that we've been talking about for a long time, how to improve the research and development of medications that are valuable to humanity. How do we improve that process such that, we are producing common goods and global goods for people that need them. And, those conversations were going about, and things like the COVAX really grew out of some of the organizations that had taken that on and started to make advances in terms of restructuring how that sort of R&D marketplace works. They were chugging along and all of a sudden, COVID is kind of roaring in here and turning up the noise, the sound on the,
the
demand and solving this problem. And so, it's a very profound time, but I would say that we do have something to work with, right? I think COVAX is excellent. I think that the idea of them providing essentially an insurance policy that everyone can kind of buy into, pool their resources. I think that the technology transfer piece of it has been done before. There was a really lovely piece written, by Public Citizen, as a group that was talking about the people's vaccine. And they were talking about this very problem. What do you have to do to have the United States and the Biden administration really lead on a global effort to rev up manufacturing of the COVID vaccine and distribute it? And one of the things they point out is that we've kind of done it before. We have BARDA is our agency in the US government that has spearheaded efforts around the world to rev up manufacturing for influenza vaccine. And they've been really successful. I mean, they were really...
Have we ever been successful globally on a time frame like we're facing now on this scale of threat?
Well, we've never had this scale of threat before in modern times. So no, we've never done this before, but we're not completely without a roadmap.
Is
We're
the
not
U.S.
going to
prepared
pick it
to
up
lead this? Will the U.S. leadership be accepted? Does it have to be through WHO, which Trump was so down on, or the UN, or who
Yeah.
can actually make this happen globally?
The United States leadership can make this happen by working with the WHO and with the global governance groups like the World Trade Organization
Mhm.
that would need to approve some of these vaccine licensing waivers. So right now, actually, before the WTO, I think India and South Africa, I think, have applied to the World Trade Organization for a waiver for intellectual property for some of the vaccines, COVID vaccines, so they can produce them in their own countries. You know, that's not ideal from the pharmaceutical companies' point of view. They would prefer to not have intellectual property rights be kind of tossed out the window in their perspective. But anyway, so there
let's
are
just take that. If that goes to court and it takes
Yeah.
6 months to get to a
Right. Yeah.
decision, we've lost again. I mean, I hear you saying we can do this hypothetically. Of course I agree, but
Yeah.
I'm struggling with the number of barriers politically here at home,
Yeah.
politically and bureaucratically at home and around the world.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Indy's reaching for his hat on the other side of that big
Yeah.
gate coming down, and time keeps moving. The thing keeps morphing. The mutation keeps happening.
I mean, Tom, you're exactly right. I mean, this is not a I'm not just telling you that this is okay, definitely going to happen. I am telling you, we are at a moment where it really may not. We really might lose World War II. Okay, we really might have not recovered the Apollo 13 mission. These are real moment where a lot of people who are very smart, who are very practical, are looking at this and saying it cannot be done.
Motivate us to real emergency action with a vision of what failing looks like.
Yeah. So, what failing looks like is, let me say this, start with the story from medical school. When I did my surgical rotation, I was there and they were, teaching what's called homeostasis, is that when you learn how to control bleeding in the operating room. I was very nervous about it. And the surgeon leaned over and he said, "Oh, don't worry, all bleeding stops eventually."
Yeah.
Right.
A cold, dark planet. Okay, great.
Yeah, well, this is not a mass extinction event, right? We're still going to have humanity. It's just, how many lives, economically, how much damage, how long are we going to, have our social lives revolving around trying not to get sick? And if you look at, okay, what happened with the flu of 1918, it just kept whipping around the globe. It mutated, and 50 million people, 100 million people died. So yeah,
We're at 2 million or something like that now, right? Globally.
Well, yeah, and this is, it's a little different pathogen. I mean, I do think if we were just to kind of ease up, not really have a very effective vaccine, not really, try to beat it back, I think we would have periods where our local health systems would be crushed. Let's say every winter we'd have huge resurgence of cases. We would, have people who are scared to teach our kids indoors, because they don't want to get sick. We would have, continued societal disruption, and I don't want to, I don't want to live like that. Do you want to live like that?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
I mean, everybody wants their kids to go back to school and get going. By the way, can kids go back to school in your vision of our reality right now?
Absolutely. And I do think that if we combine vaccination of our teachers and our school staff with testing, routine testing, and by testing, I mean, spit in a cup, at the door of the school, wait 15 minutes for the result before you enter.
This is the thing that Biden's administration just invested in out of Australia that they're bringing here on a speeded up basis, I guess.
Yeah, and we couple it with safety measures in the school building, including some mask wearing and some ventilation and air filtration improvements in our school buildings. I think we can do that. And not only do I think we can do it, I think we can do it in 100 days.
Okay, I'm all for that in schools. Your idea of this potentially getting away from us and whipping around like the 1918 epidemic and, just plowing through repeatedly That's
Right.
going to leave an awful lot of people cowering behind their doors. It's going to lead to a lot of death. You're talking 50 to 100 million globally in those days. We have a much bigger global population now, if
Yeah.
we're anywhere near that same portion.
Yeah.
I mean, that, and then you get into sociological impacts. I mean, nihilism and, I mean, how do we mend the country politically if people are just giving up on life or just looking at everything as a kind of Russian roulette every day?
Yeah, no, we're not. Well, we're not. The stakes are high here. I sort of feel like COVID is just this merciless. It just is like, until you learn the lesson of public health and equity, we're going to continue to torment you. So, I mean, that is, I think, the stakes. I think you articulate them well. I do think it's a very heavy lift, what we're up against. But I also think that I do think we can still rise to the challenge if we start to work the problem. And, I'm married to an astronomer, so I have to watch, all the, science fiction and space movies and everything. And I do have to say that is one of my favorite scenes and is in Apollo 13, where, they're realizing that the spacecraft is in terrible trouble. The whole crew is going to be killed, and it's going to be the darkest hour for the American space program. And the head of NASA hears them saying that, he's like, no, it's going to be our finest hour. And so we just have to have that mentality.
Let's do it.
Our finest hour.
We know from what you're saying that if we're not quick enough, we get an effective vaccine, we have to roll it out globally quickly, because if we roll it out slowly, COVID escapes us and it leaps on ahead and it takes on more dimensions that are difficult for us. So if we have an effective vaccine, what's the window in which we need to do this globally? Get everybody vaccinated, kind of, ideally it would be in one instant. Okay, we can't do it in one instant. Do we have to do it within the space of a month, 2 months, 6 months?
Yeah, so let me just say, it's vaccine plus public health. Okay?
Yes.
Plus
always.
three-legged stool. Plus three-legged stool. Not social. I want to say, I don't think social distancing is. It's a very crude and very costly type of public health strategy. So when I say public health strategy, I really mean those three legs of the stool. Okay, really getting serious about indoor air quality, getting serious about contact tracing, getting serious about mask wearing and less indoors, less obtrusive forms of social distancing. So vaccine plus public health strategy.
Yeah.
We will start to, when we start to do that, I think we're going to start to see the epidemic curve go down, and then we have to just jump on it. We have to drive it to zero. Elimination strategy.
In what window? Because if the window's too wide, it'll get away from us again.
Yeah, and that's a little hard for me to say, because I don't know how fast and whether there are already mutations that will escape our vaccine in the world, because we don't have that data. But I would say it is reasonable to assume that we could do this 6 to 9 months.
If we got it done in 6 to 9 months, there's a chance that it wouldn't morph outside the range of the vaccines that we're using.
Yeah. I think that is, one possibility. I also want to put a plug.
We're talking about the whole world in 6 to 9 months, right? I mean, that's really the requirement.
But we can do
let's go, NASA. Let's go.
We can do public health strategy today. That's, we can do that today. So I think that is possible. I think if we also really strategically roll out testing, before you get on the airplane, you take off your shoes and you spit in the cup. I mean, I think that is a way to also really drive down outbreaks. I think we can.
Do we have to be draconian like China, let's say, where they just close down cities? There's Barbara is asking, is the U.S. at a disadvantage? Places like China can impose restrictions, mandate vaccinations. We got people here, like large numbers of healthcare workers declining to get vaccinated. Can we do it without the top-down, authoritarian sort of?
Well, let me just say this about how we perceive how Americans have reacted to this versus how I think they actually have. So one of the things that I've noticed is that really since March of 2020, there's just been this constant message of Americans will never do X. We will never shut down like China. We will never close our schools. We will never wear our mask. We will never blah, blah, blah. And
very Trump era message.
Yeah, but every single time, actually Americans individually have really, really adopted the behaviors that we've asked them to. When you look at mask wearing, I think it's something like 75% of Americans wear a mask. I mean, that's just incredible.
No,
And
it's fantastic, though it's not comforting when I'm standing in I got to run into the corner store and 2 out of 8 people don't have masks on. I'm already uncomfortable.
okay, but 6 do, and that's pretty.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't see this decrease in cases if Americans weren't complying with,
Yeah.
with what was being asked. So we have paid tremendous prices in our personal lives to make this happen. So I think the Americans, as a sort of group of people, we really undersell ourselves in terms of what collective act, in terms of what we actually commit to personally. But I think the question was, how draconian are we going to have to be about vaccines? And here is really where I do think there is going to be a big issue because we do want to have as many people take the vaccine as possible. And, the number one thing you try to do in public health is you try to understand where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
You try to work with them. You try to address their concerns about the legitimate concerns. However, if you work in any acute situation like a refugee camp, one of the things you do when you set up a refugee camp is before people go into the food tent, you set up your measles vaccination station, and you don't let people go to get food without getting vaccinated first.
Yep.
And the reason is because measles is if you have a measles outbreak in a refugee camp setting,
Killer.
you really are in real, it's horrible. And here's the interesting kind of thing about, well, what about folks that, really refuse to take the vaccine, saying that, it's their right to refuse, medical intervention.
You saw they came out and actively closed down the Dodger Stadium vaccination. Are you kidding me? Let alone take it themselves.
That's unfortunate. But one of the kind of interesting things is like, but by refusing the vaccine and allowing the virus to spread and mutate would make the vaccine less efficacious for those that do get it. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different sort of social contract. It's a very mm-hmm. different relationship between people here that I think that these variants really crystallize and sort of take to a new level. That's just not a conversation we've had before. And I do think that that's why it's so profound what's happening. I think we are going to emerge from this really with a very different understanding of our relationship to one another and our obligations to one another, both individually as members of this country, but also between countries, and that's sort of, I think we should pause there and reflect on that, because I think that's quite interesting, right? Americans have always struggled with the idea of healthcare and who deserves healthcare.
What they owe to each other, or is there any owing here? Mm-hmm.
We've really conceived of, deep in our sort of DNA as a country, we've conceived of healthcare as something that should go to the deserving, to the people who have a job. Right, that was as a benefit, a reward for good behavior, mm-hmm. And for the deserving poor, the people that didn't have a job, okay, that's a charity, act of charity. We should give them health care, because they're by the grace of God go on. That was not true of our education system. I think it's important to know. Our education system was really founded on the idea that every child needed to be able to read the Bible. Everyone had to have their own personal relationship with God, right? So we have a public education system, but we have a largely private sector and, Hydra-headed health system that is really still premised in some sense on this idea of a reward for work.
Individual merit.
Yeah, and I do think that this is a huge moment for us to really reconsider whether that's how we want to conceive of healthcare. And, we've had this huge debate over whether healthcare is a right. And believe me, I definitely think of it in that way. And I think that's a profound thing to say, but maybe the way that we need to talk about this, the American public, is as a collective security measure. Healthcare and access to healthcare as a collective security issue, because I do think we're a little bit more comfortable talking about collective security. And I think that helps define, is more accurate in terms of how it would mean that we related to one another, and help us shaping our sort of ideas about citizenship. Anyway, that's the kinds of things I've been thinking about as we're talking to folks about convincing them to, try to get vaccinated. So we'll see. I am loath to do any kind of very heavy-handed coercive measure, because you need people's buy-in and trust to the public health system. But at the end of the day, there will be a lot of sort of natural nudges, right? You can't enroll your kid in school, you can't get on that airplane, you can't travel to that country, you can't have this job, work on this factory floor, whatever, and unless you're either vaccinated or tested repeatedly. Well, so I think that's where we're headed. Can we get there fast enough? I mean, it's really a moment of equipoise. I don't know. And, Indiana Jones does get his hat out in the end, but we're not in Hollywood.
Pretty tough moment. We are not in Hollywood. We've got no time. I mean, as you say, it's a chase. We're chasing COVID. It's morphing. If we lag behind, it morphs out of range. We can't control it.
Yep.
We've got so many things to pull together here that you describe. At a moment where we're still worried about Congress people bringing guns onto the floor of the House of Representatives, where your sister is serving. I mean, to go back to that, we're supposed to pull all this off, and here we are only weeks from rampaging mob inside our Capitol building. And that's just for the United States, let alone globally.
Yeah.
We've got to do it. We can do it if we pull it together, but what a challenge to get all of this country and the world on some kind of a single page and make it happen in a hurry. And if we don't, as you say, it will cycle through, and the kind of society that comes out the other side of that. I really worry about. We've done an amazing hour that sort of brought my settings up to date on many fronts, and we're grateful for it, Dr. Bourdeaux. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's such an honor and a pleasure to join you. I really appreciate it.
It's great. Good luck with your work. Keep the faith. Hope your sister gets something good going in Congress. And
once more into the breach.
Once more. Come back and talk to us when we get a little further down this road, hopefully with even more success under our belt. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Margaret
Bourdeaux of Harvard's Kennedy School's Belfer Center and the Harvard Medical School, there with the, Security and Global Health Project at the Belfer Center. It's great to have you with us. Thanks for all your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to more in this time. We'll be back on this, in a couple of days. On Thursday, we're talking with astronaut Jessica Meyer. I don't know if you just saw this. As we're talking today, Jeff Bezos has stepped down as the CEO of Amazon. Amazon's been very involved in the space race. Elon Musk very involved in the space race. NASA, of course, in the space race. Jessica Meyer spent a lot of time in space on the International Space Station. We're going to talk with her on our next episode about how the whole human push into space is evolving at high speed right now. Thanks to Margaret Bourdeaux for being with us today. Thanks to you for being with us. It's always great to have you right here. We'll see you next time. Bye.